I'm no stranger to the unexplainable world of the paranormal. I've had my odd share of experiences, but as much as I love and appreciate a good ghost story, I tend to take most of them with a grain of salt. I've always remained the skeptical type, instead of jumping to the conclusion that something a little strange is a ghost, an unexplained knock, a whisper in the wind. I'll look for logical reasons and try to rack my brain for answers until eventually I find one that makes sense of my situation. But this thought process of mine changed completely when my fiancé and I traveled to visit his family one year. Something that frazzled my mind for weeks and to this day still makes me uneasy. It was the holidays, a busy time of the year filled with joyous celebration, festive decor, and the warmth of family gatherings. It's become tradition for my fiancé Nick and I to travel to his parents' place for dinner, exchanging gifts, and spending quality time through the week until New Year. His mom is quite the host, and she's always done a wonderful job of getting everyone together, preparing a delicious meal, and making the house feel warm and inviting. We had just gotten over the most hectic of our holiday shopping and gift preparation, so Nick and I were both looking forward to this much-needed retreat. However, there was a slight change of plans this time around, as our gathering swelled with more family and friends than usual, and after some discussion, Nick took the initiative to inform his parents that we would secure a nearby rental for the first couple of days. That way there would be ample rooms for the full house of company at his parents' place, and would also allow us some quiet time to unwind by ourselves. We loaded up the presents along with our packed bags for the trip, and began the 5-hour drive up north toward Missoula, where Nick's parents' property lay nestled amidst the trees, secluded and off the beaten path. The rental we ended up getting was a great find, as it sat only about 15 minutes from our main destination and looked to be a newer listing. It was a small and rustic 2-bedroom cabin with a small fireplace and beautiful view of the woods. As excited as I was to visit with everyone, I was relishing the idea of solitude after a long day, accompanied by Nick and a hearty glass of wine by the crackling fire. After a good while on the road, we eventually pulled into the rental property. Our plan was to get things unloaded, freshen up a bit, and then continue the short rest of the way up to Nick's parents. As we stepped into the cabin, the floorboards squeaked and shifted under our boots. The interior was quaint and well maintained, with hints of rustic charm. I eyed the comfy-looking couch by the cobblestone fireplace, and the more I stared, the more I felt it beckoning me to sink in to relax. A hard notion to resist, but there were presents to be sorted, and a handful of eager family awaiting us. I'll spare the details of the day spent with family, but needless to say it was pleasant and heartwarming to catch up with everyone. Later that evening, we turned back into our rental for the night, both of us tired from the drive and eventful day. A night of relaxation was just what we needed. As we entered the cabin once more, Nick had started to prepare a fire while I popped open a bottle of wine and lit a couple candles. With the fire soon crackling and the musky smell of cedar candles filling the air, we both sank into the couch and put in an old DVD to snuggle up to. It wasn't long before Nick's breathing became deeper, and the comfort of our surroundings, being close to family, and the end of a long day, soon lulled me into a peaceful sleep. But that peacefulness was soon disturbed by a dream, a dark dream. It still baffles me. I dreamt about the cabin, one of those dreams where you know where you are. It might not appear as an exact replica, but there are distinct resemblances. The layout, the scenery, the furniture maybe. In this dream, I stood in the living room of the cabin, and at the opposite end from me, down the small hall by the back bedrooms, stood a looming figure, a tall and dark mass. I couldn't move in my dream, and this entity, whatever it was, just watched me. The darkness crept across the walls, snuffing out all the lights, as the entire place was plunged into solid black. An overwhelming sense of dread consumed me until I jolted upright, startling Nick in the process. I then felt his comforting touch on my arm, accompanied by a voice that was both reassuring and slightly bewildered, asking if I was all right. With a heaviness in my chest, I began to feel foolish as I caught my breath, my attention shifting to the slow-moving DVD symbol on the now idle television. I tried to play it off, slightly chuckling as I mentioned to Nick that it felt like one of those dreams where you suddenly fall. It seemed realistic enough, and I chose not to go into the unsettling details of the actual dream I had. We wearily rose from the couch to head to the bed when I realized the candles I had lit, the ones we had accidentally drifted off to sleep with lit just a couple hours ago, were now extinguished. There was still a gentle wisp of smoke arising from them, as if it was recent. The following day I felt off. I had a headache and felt sick to my stomach. I did my best to put it aside and carry on through the busy day, but the feeling seemed to linger. I had already been asked a handful of times by Nick, and even his brother, if I was okay. It got to the point Nick even offered taking me back to the cabin to rest. I refused. It was our second day in, and I already felt like such a downer. The last thing I wanted was to excuse myself and miss out on everything. I managed to truck on, and I'll admit, by the end of it I was feeling more like myself again. It was our second and final night at our rental anyway, and with it being such a cozy place, I was starting to get mad at myself for even feeling a tinge of anxiety as we pulled back up the drive. It was just a silly dream, I thought, a silly coincidence with the candles. I shouldn't be letting it sit with me like this. Finally, I dismissed it as being brought on by stress and exhaustion. It had been a busy holiday season after all, but we were on our trip now, and it was our time to unwind and finally catch up on relaxing. That night, Nick and I decided to play a couple games of cards. I could tell he was hesitant due to how I had been, but I assured him I felt better. Soon, the crackle of the fire, as well as the soft patter of cards being shuffled, set me even more at ease. A bit of time went by before Nick and I both practically jumped into the ceiling. A loud crash was heard from down the hall. Unsure of what even produced such a noise, Nick looked at me as he cautiously motioned for me to stay put, and he got up from the table to make his way toward the sound. He flipped the lights on as he began to search both bedrooms and the hallway bath. Nothing. He shrugged and shook his head at me before peering outside from one of the windows. Suddenly, that unsettling feeling was back. We tried to rationalize what it could have been, but nothing added up. The sound resembled the impact of a heavy object being dropped on the wooden floor, similar to a box filled with beads as it cracked open, and the contents scattered across the surface. Both of us were unnerved, but with nothing coming from the situation. We finished up our evening and soon made our way to bed. I recall it being a little after 2 a.m. when I randomly awoke. I don't know why. I wasn't aware of any dreams and I hadn't awoken to any noise. I was just awake. I shifted to my side and moved a bit closer to Nick as I stared out the window. The gentle glow of the moonlight comforted me as I closed my eyes and focused on sleep. Then it happened. An awful, foreboding feeling of being watched. This feeling was intense. I wanted to open my eyes, but I didn't dare. My mind imagining a grotesque face just inches from my own, or that same dark figure watching us from the gloomy corners of my room. I shifted my thoughts and focused on steady breaths. Maybe I was just paranoid from having the odd dream, but why still? Give it a couple more minutes and suddenly I felt what I can only describe as a subtle and very cold breeze hit my neck. I shot up in bed and yelled, feeling as though I was going to have to go up against someone, something. Nick sat up in an instant and he looked around as if in a daze, ready to fight a possible intruder. I was shaken and embarrassed. I apologized and told him that the place was just making me jumpy. I couldn't help but feel something wasn't right. Nick's parents are early birds, but the 4-hour wait to 6 a.m. to roll around seemed like ages away. My heartbeat still hadn't quite settled, and Nick turned on one of the bedside lamps as he asked me what was going on. With sleep now being nowhere in my plans at this point, I relayed everything. The shady bluish hue of the gray morning began to lighten the cabin up more, if only just a little bit. This gave me a sense of relief as I knew we'd soon be surrounded by family and friends again, and instead of the cabin tonight, we'd be staying in one of the bedrooms at Nick's mom and dad's for the remainder of our stay. I look back to it again just writing about it now, and I truly don't know how to explain the events that happened at our seemingly cozy rental. The dream, the loud crash, the cold air, and the ever-growing sense of unease. Maybe the stress wearing away from the busy season took a toll on me, or maybe it was just my overactive mind, a combination. Regardless, the experience is something that I can still remember, as though it happened yesterday. And no matter how hard I try, I still don't have answers. My grandmother was an important person in my life when I was a young child. When I was about 3, my parents were building a new home, and they ended up selling the home that we were living in quicker than they thought they would. With no place to go since the new home was not yet ready, we moved in temporarily with my grandparents. My grandmother was a sweet and incredibly kind person, and spent many hours with my brother and me playing games and amusing us. Although I was very young, I still have memories of how much fun we had with her, and it was clear how much she loved us. Shortly after we moved to our new home, my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer and sadly died shortly after. I was only 4 years old when this happened. My brother Jeff and I have always been close. We're just 21 months apart. He was my very first friend, and we continue that friendship today. In the new home that we moved into, Jeff's bedroom was right next door to my room, and our parents' room was across the hallway from Jeff's room. On weekends when we were good, our parents would let us have sleepovers in my brother's room. His bed was a double bed, where mine was just a twin, and it was the bed that my father slept in when he was growing up. It was old and comfy cozy. One night when I was either 4 or 5, we were having a sleepover in Jeff's room. I woke up in the middle of the night. There was an aura of light coming from the foot of the bed, so I looked there. I was surprised to see my grandmother standing at the foot, watching us. Since this was a year or two after she passed away, I was well aware at the time that this was her spirit. I wasn't afraid because I knew it was my grandmother, and I somehow just knew that she was there to check in on us and make sure we were okay. After a few minutes, I remember rolling over and going back to sleep. I never mentioned this experience to anyone for a very long time because I thought that no one would believe me. I specifically never mentioned it to anyone in my immediate family because I thought they would just laugh at me. My mother is now 91, living in an assisted living facility, and we had quite a bit of time to reminisce about her life and our lives together. One day recently, the subject of ghosts and spirits came up, and I decided it was time to tell her. I was ready for her to laugh at me or say that I must have imagined it, but I wasn't prepared for the reaction that she gave me instead. Her jaw dropped, and she proceeded to tell me about when my grandmother had also visited her. Around the same time my grandmother had visited me, my mother recalls waking up in the middle of the night to a very bright light emanating from my brother's room. My mother told me she got up to investigate, but by the time she got up, the light had disappeared. She thought that maybe she left a curtain open, but all the curtains were closed. Our bedrooms were on the second floor, so it wasn't possible that it was car lights or any lights coming in from the street. Besides, we lived in a sleepy little community, and typically there were no cars on the small road outside of our house late at night. There was no explanation for the light. Also around the same time, my mother recalls being woken up from sleep at night, several nights in a row, to the feeling of the mattress being dipped down by her feet, as if someone was sitting at the foot of the bed. When she opened her eyes, she expected to see either my brother or me, but no one was there. Since these events happened shortly after my grandmother passed away, my mother often felt as though it was her coming to visit. However, like me, my mother never mentioned it to anyone because she too thought no one would believe her. After we both shared our experiences with each other, it made us both feel better knowing that we had these similarities. We still have no explanation for what we saw, and we haven't had any more experiences since then. But we are both convinced that this was grandmother's way of checking in on us, just to make sure we were okay. And although we haven't seen her since then, we're both comforted knowing that even though she's passed on, she's still able to watch over us.